Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special meeting of the Town of Richmond Select Board, November 25th, 2024. We are here tonight on an off night to discuss next year's budget. Before we begin with our warned agenda, would anybody here in person or online care to make a public comment? Go ahead.
Can I stand up there?
Yeah,
There's no mic over that section.
we can hear you, but Cyber World cannot.
Okay. My name is Patty Breshett, and I'm here today to, as a representative of Richmond Racial Equity. I know that you're not talking about the police budget tonight, so I don't really want to take up a lot of your time. And you really don't need to respond if you don't want to. I just wanted to just mention something we would love to be on your radar as you pursue the budget. At a public safety meeting we had, and Richmond Racial Equity has been sponsoring those public safety events in order to help bring transparency to policing and public safety. Lisa Miller asked the question of the chief, what is it that we can do to support you and to support the police? And the thing that the chief said at that time 2 years ago was, I need administrative assistance. Of 2 towns now, 2 select boards, 2 budgets, 2 sets of buildings and bills and payments and county, and we got lots of stuff going on. And our interest is that along these lines of public safety, we would really like to see the website maintained, and actually we'd like to see more things included and then maintained. And so to that effort, we've been going to many town websites around the county and beyond to find out exactly what kinds of data is presented to the public from different towns. And so we're getting quite a ways along with this process to know what's possible. What is possible that the police department and others, the Williston CJC is now a contract. We would like their information. We want Howard Mental Health information, all under the public safety thing. However, we do not want to ask the chief to do that in addition to doubling up on everything else that the chief is doing and his officers are doing. So we would really like you to consider a full-time admin. We used to have an admin, a part-time admin for police. I thought that position is still available. I don't know if it is still there and we just haven't filled it. But we definitely should be filling it. And then we can come back to you guys or talk to Josh or the chief or whatever and say, could part of this person's job be data input? Here's the data we would really like. We know that's available. We'll be talking to the chief about what exactly that might look like. And obviously you guys we'll have that in, we'll talk to Josh and so forth. But we'd love to see that in your budget this year. So that's it.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Josh Board, any additions, deletions, or modifications to tonight's agenda?
Other than the whole
thing?
the whole thing, we're just gonna-
Oh, yeah, no. I do just want to point out, due to my negligence, we had an oversight last week and we did not move to approve the warrants. So that is on tonight's agenda. We approved them, but we didn't approve them. Okay, getting into tonight's warrant agenda. First on the agenda tonight is review of options for loans to fund expenses from the July 2024 flood. Josh, did you want to lead us on this discussion?
Sure, I can kind of try to set the table a little bit. So Connie reached out to a number of banks to try to figure out what options would be out there. She did find some 1-year, basically what they call current expense options that we could look into. We had rates in the packet on, I think, 750,000, $1 million, and 1.5 million. We also reached out to the attorney, though, as far as approval or ability to borrow, and but his response in the packet. I think number 3 sort of kind of gets to sort of the crux of it. The ability to borrow without board approval is dependent upon the need for the funds. It is a cash flow driven determination. The fact that the town has paid its expenses and its cash flow is adequate for the FY 25 budget indicates that the town does not presently need a current expense note. It may be that such a loan will be needed on July 1, as the town has to cover then current expenses, but won't have tax revenue until August. There's no authority to borrow simply to refill fund balances consistent with the fiscal policy. If the town made inter-fund transfers of money on an emergency basis, there could be justification to borrow. So that seems to be saying that because we didn't need to borrow immediately to pay for this, we can't really borrow now, but we could borrow later in the year if our cash flow becomes tight where we need to borrow.
Is there some sort of middle ground here where we would have authority to utilize a line of credit, maybe?
I think, I mean, again, I think if we needed the funds, we could probably do a line of credit, which I think the current expense note is fairly close to a line of credit because it's something short-term, knowing you're going to be getting paid back from it eventually.
Current expense note would be for 1 year,
Okay.
and then at the end of the year, if we hadn't been reimbursed by everything from FEMA, we could renew it. It functions a lot like a ban, but with less hoops to jump through.
Bart?
So one of the things that crosses my mind and perhaps for discussion is one possibility is to use some unspent dollars from last year, sort of, vacancy savings, whatever. Use them to offset taxes with a recognition that that is going to likely push us into a point where at some point in the next year, we will need to borrow money. That we make it part of our budget plan, yes. That we make.
But
part of our
right
budget.
now, unassigned funds are non-existent, so we can't put it towards the fiscal year 26 budget unless we borrow more than the point where we hit that 15% for our policies. So in order to create unassigned funds, we'd have to borrow more than 1.5 million, where at most for cash flow purposes, possibly next June, July, like the attorney is saying, we may want to do a current expense note for 500,000 to pay for the things that absolutely need to be paid for until August.
But I think, are you saying maybe, and you can answer for yourself, but if we don't look at current expenses of FY 25 and we say at the end of FY 24, we had so much in unassigned funds, we utilize that, and then if we do get tight, we have to take it a little bit.
That's sort of where I'm going, but it is all to Connie's kind of description. I think it is sort of accounting because it has to do with cash flow. If in effect, their advice is use your local available dollars until they're depleted and then you need them later. It does it seems like that compels us to put us into a position of raising taxes higher than we would like to.
Well, we don't like to raise taxes at all, but I get your point.
Well, because we've set a standard of what's inflation, 3 or 3.5%, that seems plausible. But if we had 20%, it's likely, in my opinion, to be voted down, and then we have to cut the budget anyway.
Right, I think anything in double digits is gonna get voted down, but I might be surprised.
So the other
Okay,
piece
well-
too is, we were asking is interest reimbursable by FEMA? And the answer was yes,
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay,
But-
that's a
but
surprise.
quite possibly. I'm not gonna say 100% yes, but the attorney felt that it is most likely only gonna cover the same I would expenses. So say we take a big loan, we incur a couple $100,000 in interest. Only 75% of that might be reimbursable by FEMA, not the whole 100%. that
But I
we would
think-
pay.
I think we would get the 75% based on the documentation that FEMA sent over. I mean, more traditionally, it's a bond bank loan, I think. But if you've got to get a loan for a current expense, then you need to do that. And FEMA, I think, would look favorably upon that. The way they structure it, the minute they obligate money, then they stop paying interest. So if you have $100,000 for repair of Heinsberg Road, and you take that out now, and then they obligate that project on June 1st, you're done with the interest, which makes sense. So there might be a little overlap by the time they obligate it, you actually get it paid back.
Right, there can be many years between.
No, once they obligate it, we usually get it within a few weeks after
Oh.
that. So it wouldn't be too much wiggle room there. If we borrowed for 5 or 6 projects it could get a little challenging accounting wise, but we'd figure that out. Another thought that I had is, we haven't really looked at a lot of vacancy savings for this year. We know we're gonna have some in police, so similar to what we did last year when we looked at how we got to the 422 and change last year, was we looked at unassigned funds, and we looked at that projection. Part of that projection was, okay, we already know that year to date, we're this far under budget on policing, and it was mostly police that we looked at because it was under budgeted. So we could look at that and say, well, there's X amount of dollars that's already been realized there at this point. Just to give us an idea, of something that we might be able to use, which we haven't calculated too much yet.
It helps with the cash flow. So we might not need the expense note.
Mhm.
The other nice thing about the expense note is it does not require voter approval. So we could wait, like Jim and I are gonna be keeping an eye on the cash flow. And we could say, okay, we're down to 500,000 in June, time to go get some cash. We'd be able to do that
Not
relatively.
have to wait for town meeting. Yeah, that is a good point.
And they said there's a lot less hoops to jump through for that type of loan. We looked into the bond bank as well, and we don't know if we would even be eligible. But we won't have any more information for another month.
Yeah, they haven't put out a program yet. I think they've done some programs that are for more emergency needs for towns. Like the thing they had about was like, if towns currently have roads that have residents cut off from emergency services, they're sort of in that round right now. When it sounds like they will open up a round for towns in general, but there'll be a limited amount of funds, and I think there'll be a pecking order for that based on need. Where we land in that, it's hard to say. I know there are some towns that have expenses that are more than their annual town budget, so they'd probably get priority. But it's hard to say until we know more facts from the bond bank.
It's actually not based on our budget now, it's based on a percentage of the grand list.
Okay. Well, as an example, some proportionally, some towns have a much higher expense than
Right,
we,
our
even though
grand-
our expense is not small. Others have a much higher expense based on their grand list for budget, however you want to look at it. So, they're not, not a, I mean, maybe not the update we were hoping for. I think for next meeting, I think we could look at police savings and see, because we know year to date will be a certain amount under on that.
Yeah.
So we could probably realize some of that and see where that could work into the next budget potentially. Or next budget discussion.
Okay.
You do have a hand up if you want to go there before you move on.
Yeah, Kara, go ahead.
Just a question, because I want to make sure I'm understanding the whole purpose of this conversation is that we're talking about loans. We're talking about loans in case of emergencies and things like that. Is that what we're talking about? In case there's in case FEMA doesn't pay us for our flood events and things like that. Is that why we're talking about loans right now? Because you haven't had to have a loan, and for I don't know, Bard, have they had to loan money since you've been on the select board? Have you had to borrow money for cash flow purposes in the past 10 years?
Not for municipal stuff, but water and sewer did for completing the tank. That's the only thing I
Okay.
can.
That
Well,
was
and
for
we have borrowed
no,
money
that's
for
not that's capital
for-
loans. That's not
Yeah,
cash
different.
flow.
Yeah.
So I can answer how we got here tonight unless one of you want to take that.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, so it's a good question, Karen. At the last meeting, we were looking at that we had about $2 million in current expenses from the from the 2024 flood. We've been able to pay those expenses based on unassigned funds from 2020 FY24. But the concern is that 2 years ago, we used $500,000 of unassigned funds to offset the tax rate. Last year, we used $433,000 of unassigned funds to offset the tax rate. Without a sort of larger influx of unassigned funds to help offset the tax rate this year, even if we kept the budget completely flat expense-wise, we'd be looking at about an 8.5% increase. So that unassigned money that we've used over the last couple of years has kept the tax rate increase low, and without that for FY 26, we're faced with quite a big challenge of keeping the tax rate in a reasonable realm. So the question was, well, could we borrow money to pay for that, or some of the $2 million that we spent over the summer, to kind of help us pay that and then pay that loan back when we get reimbursed by FEMA, thus create, sort of preserving the unassigned funds that we did have coming into this fiscal year. So hopefully that background's a little helpful to where we got today, and that might make the lawyer's explanation make a little more sense too. Where he's saying, I think where you were going, Kara, is, if we had another flood tomorrow that cost $2 million, we would need a loan right now to get through that. And the lawyer's saying that because we got through the flood without needing the note, we don't really need one right now. But, as we get later in the year, we might, because cash flow gets tighter as we get later in the year, even though we were able to sort of sustain ourselves.
So can I ask a follow-up question to that in regards to the FEMA and the 2 million for FY 24? In FY 24, you actually received FEMA reimbursements for FY 23, or did
Yep.
that come after the July 1?
No, so some of it came in fiscal year 24, and it was booked at fiscal year 24 and was included in the unassigned restricted funds that the auditors put forth. Some of that came after and was booked into FY 25. But as we looked at our cash flow, we incorporated all of that. And at this point, I think we're almost 100% paid back from 23. We do, though, still have 2 projects that we've been paid for that haven't yet been completed. One on Dugway Road, which is going to be quite expensive. So we need to kind of hold that money back and also budget some additional expenses because they're going to pay us at 90% for that. And then another one with Jericho Road. It's actually Old Jericho Road is a recreational path out there.
Right.
That project hasn't been completed yet either.
So
But we did look at all those. We did look at all those ins and outs as far as where we've been paid back, where we expect to be paid back, and expenses to date for this year's flood.
So the FY 24 money received then basically looks like extra revenue, and it sits in the unallocated funds, but basically looking like the quote net profit of a business, meaning it's the funds that are left over because you received more revenues in 24 than you expected, but then you're sitting on the expense side of things for the actual 24 flooding that is counteracting that. So
Correct.
you don't foresee, although we got FY 23 in FY 24, you're not projecting that you're going to get FY 24 in FY 25.
We have.
Well, no, I think you mean reimbursement from the 24 flood in this current fiscal year that we're in.
Correct.
Just like
you did last year.
I feel like we're too early in the process to project that at this point. We've just started the process with FEMA for the 24 flood. I think by this time next year, or by August, September of next year, there's a good chance we'll start to get some payments from them. But even if it goes as smoothly as it can, and it's been going actually really well lately, thanks to Duncan and Pete and our FEMA rep, the process still takes quite a bit. I would be uncomfortable estimating any amount to come in fiscal year 25 at this point.
But it's a $2 million bill that's sitting out there, a receivable of, that's what you were saying. You've had $2 million of expenses in 24. So we've got a $2 million receivable that could have happened in FY 25, or it could happen at the very beginning of FY 26. So it would be, if you have a cash flow problem at the very end of the year for the 1 month of July, you're talking about possibly having to have a loan for that time period, but you don't foresee any cash flow issues up until that point, unless you have another flood. And then every town that's having flooding is going to have the same problem. In the state and federal government have to figure out stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty accurate. Just one note, though, that FEMA reimburses 75%. So we're looking at about 1.5 million coming back on those hard expenses. Probably a little bit more than that, because we also still have to factor in staff time and equipment time that the staff used. We haven't really begun to do that calculation yet, but there's 3 or 4 months of highways time pretty much devoted to this. But yes, there is a receivable that we expect to receive from FEMA. sometime spring, summer, fall next year, but the exact timing on that right now is
I thought
unclear.
there was also state funding that was going to also reimburse that you were up to 90% and not 75%.
So that 90% just got announced for the 2023 flood, which we're gonna now be receiving additional money from the state for the 23 flooding because they've paid out so far at 75%. We've also included that into our projections for potential unassigned funds at the end of this fiscal year and our cash flow. The 2024 flood is still obligated right now at 75%. It's possible that they'll increase that, but it took them a year to go from 75 to 90 for the 23 flood. So right now we're going on the assumption it's going to be 25% plus an additional 17.5 from the state. But that additional state money probably takes at least another year after you close out with FEMA, because you don't get that until like every last I is dotted and T is crossed. Whereas the FEMA money comes relatively sooner.
Thank you for that clarification. And I think it's key is that the biggest thing that the taxpayer has to realize is the loans that you're talking about is only an emergency case for cash flow. I mean, it's not for anything else. So like the water sewer comment with that for the water tank, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about loans for anything other than cash flow emergency case basis.
Yep.
And in talking to the banks, if we say we thought, okay, we can make it without doing a current expense note. And then we did get hit with another flood in July. At that point, our cash is going to be super low. We're going to have to act fast.
Yeah.
To take care of a current event. The bank said in that case, you would do a bond anticipation note. So we would be able to get money quickly from the bank, but we would have to be taking a bond later.
Bart?
Would it be safe to say one of the take homes from this, while we were trying to come up with a way of avoiding the sawtooth or whipsaw effect of ups and downs, it would appear this paints us into the corner of that's what we have. If you got to spend your own money first, then you run out, you don't have money for vacancy savings, you used it, then you get paid everything back. And now you have a significant surplus. And maybe taxes are flat or even go down in a future year, but they go up significantly in the next year.
Yeah.
That's the whipsawing that we were talking about avoiding, but it seems like the law and the legal advice kind of push us into that position.
I mean, this is the perfect example of how do we get such high unassigned funds? And part of it is through fewer expenses, vacancy savings. But the other part is when all this FEMA money rolls in, then we're going to have a lot of unassigned. And what I would recommend at that point is you put it towards your reserves in your budgets, and that helps keep your taxes down for a longer period of time because you won't need to raise taxes to fund the reserves.
I hate to break it to you, David, but I've never had my taxes go down. So that's a dream. You know, you can talk about this whiplash effect and all that kind of crap. You reserve so much money all the time. You've had taxes that have been up the whole time. You've only bought down in the last 2 years.
Carrie, every couple of months, I have to tell you this.
The last 2
taxes went
years.
down at this. Carrie, you're not telling the truth. Every couple of months, I have to remind you of this. The tax rate
My
went down.
taxes did
fiscal year
not go down.
2022. It did go down, Carrie.
I had a reassessment and my taxes did not go down, Jay.
The tax rate went down. When we talk about the tax rate going down, it did go down.
Because my grand list value went up.
But the taxes for the town, tax rate for the town went down.
Because you
Next.
bought it down in the last 2 years, Jay. You didn't let me finish. I said in the last 2 years, you've bought it down using.
Never. You said
spending.
never. You said
My
never.
tax rates have never gone down without using the excess money that you had. They have never gone down without using the excess money that you overtaxed years before or you had cost savings on. That's my point. If you didn't use that money, it wouldn't go down.
June, go ahead.
I just want to say that I disagree with putting unreserved into reserve. I think that you want to have that available when you need it. Once you put it into reserve funds, you don't have it accessible. And so I am not in favor of doing that.
And I want to agree with June. I can't see I'm not a finance director. I don't have a degree in accounting, but I can't see a compelling reason to do that for the reason she just said.
But you can use those funds You can only utilize cash from reserves for a similar purpose. So you take that money and you put it towards a highway capital reserve, you have an emergency, you can use that cash for your emergency. That is what the attorneys have told
And I
us.
think another thing that maybe I can try to explain, I kind of were looking at like, okay, if we can't put money into the budget right now, what can we do to reduce the current ask? Part of that is reducing what we put into reserves this year and increasing a modest amount each of the next 5 years to make sure that those reserves are still funded for the capital that we have planned for those reserves. And in our discussions, as we talked about that, we said, well, let's say next year we have $400,000 that we can put towards the budget, or whatever the number is, rather than, maybe we sort of mark that to go towards those reserves to offset the tax rate, rather than towards like current expenses. And then if you funded a reserve a little bit earlier, according to the plan, you could kind of keep taxes lower that year and in future years. So it would still go into the budget. It would still be a tax offset. It just might go over a couple of years. And we haven't like fully gone through this analysis yet because we're not there yet. But it was part of the thought was maybe it could help reduce some of that whipsaw effect where if we're not offsetting a current expense, but a longer term reserve expense, we might be able to keep that line a little bit smoother.
Does seem like after the last 2 years of flooding and other stuff happening, that it would be kind of naive to just give all that money back and not keep cash flow. Not for the sake of squirreling it away, but knowing that there's likely to be something that's gonna
At
happen.
this point, we're getting into that thing that tried to avoid a literal rainy day fund.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was part of the conversation the last couple of years is, I mean, about this time every year, for at least the last 3 years, we sit down and look at what's our projection and we try to get it so that we're projected to have only 15% of the budget still left in unassigned and restricted funds. And we put anything over that into the current budget to try to offset taxes. So that we have been trying
That's
to
a
do
formal
that.
policy now.
Yeah, there's a policy on that 15%.
It seems like if that policy had been in place before any of this flooding had happened and we weren't rolling over money, we would be in a pretty bad spot. So that policy
would.
came from a good place, but
Yeah.
it's also could have really bad consequences. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I wasn't part of that. I don't want to Monday night quarterback it, but it seems like that policy might be a little misguided knowing what we know now.
Meaning we should have had a higher amount.
I guess fundamentally, my business, it's like not the same amount of revenue, it's like 1/3 the revenue of the town, and my family, which doesn't make that much, we have rainy day funds, because if we didn't, we would go bankrupt.
Yeah.
The resistance to the rainy
I
day
guess-
fund though is, I'm sorry, Adam, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, that's it. I mean, I know there has to be constraints on it. We don't want to have an endowment. We don't want to get to that point. But knowing the unpredictability of our financial situation from one event, never mind 2 or 3 events.
The resistance to the rainy day fund comes in part from the philosophy that we shouldn't be taxing voters extra, just to have money to squirrel away and not actually spend. That's very unpopular. And even though, for consumer finance, putting money aside for my vacation now so that I have it when I want to go on vacation, I mean, it makes sense. My vacation and people's taxes are not the same thing.
I guess that makes
And in
sense.
my recollection is we had a rainy day fund when I first started here, and the auditors looked at that and said, you actually can't legally have a rainy day fund. You need to have a reserve that's for specific
Yeah.
projects and pieces of
So
equipment.
can we create a disaster recovery fund or
That
something?
sounds specific.
That's sort of
know
what
what
our
those are.
15%
Specific constraints. I mean,
15% ends up being that kind of.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Art?
I think part of the principle there is you're not taxing people now for an event that might happen 5 or 10 years from now.
Right.
And not
Yeah.
to be glib, but some of the people you're taxing now won't be here literally or
Conversely, though,
geographically.
completely
5 years
opposite
from now.
is any bond we vote on now, there's a lot of people who vote on that will not be paying on that and will be dead. Well, we're still paying it, so.
The point of the bond,
Cuts both
however,
ways.
is that the idea is you're investing, like in the case of the water sewer system, you're investing in a water tank that purportedly is gonna last 100 years. So at some point you pay it off and the people after that period get a free water tank. So it's not entirely fair or equitable over time.
Yeah.
Really where I was going though is if we say, what's left for options or opportunities to reduce this whipsawing and take the sine wave from going like this to going like this? Maybe it is, yes, well, instead of going like this, it's going more like this,
Yeah.
where it's more predictable and less oscillation. And so maybe it is this, that we, in a calculated way, reduce our investment in reserves for, it's like a reserve holiday, where we don't have to tax people as much, put it in reserve, and then we could figure out what that dollar figure is, and when we get paid back, those dollars would go into the investment. This is what I think you were saying.
Exactly.
Those dollars go into the reserve based on what we otherwise would have put in
Right.
this year. And the remainder go into unassigned funds. It's really just an offset, like, okay, so I'm not investing in my retirement fund this year, but next year I'm gonna like pay twice as much to offset my inability to do it this year, to use an awkward metaphor.
Yeah.
Adam, we had just implemented that 15% policy last November.
I remember.
And there were a few people who thought it should be more. There were people who thought it should be less. And the question that was asked was, can we revise this at any point? So rather than being caught without a policy, I said, yeah, you can revise
It's
it
better to have a policy.
anytime you want.
like-
But
Was the
also,
15%?
part of that policy, the very bottom paragraph does not allow for replenishing unassigned funds. And we intentionally did that because there was so much controversy over that 15%.
Remind me, did we get the 15% by talking to VLCT?
It was auditor suggestion.
Auditors, okay.
And it's like a standard across the
Uh,
country, although our former auditors, Rick would
Were
have told you over 20%.
Yeah.
I don't think 20% helps you that much more when you have an over $2 million flood.
Yeah, yeah,
No, I don't think
there's a
so
good
either.
chance we exceed the whatever percentage.
And realistically, we have more unassigned funds as a percentage, more than 15% at the end of FY '24. Because even though we tried to project it, there were still more savings in police and other revenues that came in, so we were above 15% when the flood hit.
Kara, go ahead.
Well, I'm just confused with if it's a $2 million flood, I thought we had other highway reserve funds that could be used, bridge and culverts, things like that, other highway reserve funds that could be used. And then wouldn't those reserves be replenished when FEMA paid back? That was the whole purpose of reserves, was not just for capital improvements, but were for emergencies as well. So don't we already have, and that's why we didn't need a loan for the $2 million, was both having to do with the unassigned, because you didn't have 2 million in unassigned when you put in that policy. And I thought that policy, I thought you agreed to a higher rate. I thought it ended up at 18%. Did you stay down at the
it was-
15?
It was 15, yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, thank you.
And
But
for-
I just
for
thought
our
that's the purpose of the highway reserves that could be used for those purposes on emergencies.
No. The cash, so you got most of our reserve accounts live in the same general checking account as all our budget lines. We can utilize the cash from 3 very specific reserves that would be similar to the same type of purpose. Our capital reserves all have very specific purposes.
So we can't use fire truck reserves for floods. We
You
can't-
couldn't do that, but also even if you were looking at highway, our highway capital reserve is slated for dump truck, pickup truck, tractor this year.
I wasn't
Everything
talking
goes,
about
everything that goes into those reserves have a scope of 5 years that it is being spent. But if we have to, can we, it's like we're in the middle of a flood and we have 2 million, well, we have 2 million in reserves, we're not gonna not use that.
So we have to pay
But
it
we
back.
could only use as much cash as those 3 reserves currently have available. And
question?
then we would have to postpone
Right.
buying the dump truck, buying the pickup truck, and wait until the FEMA funds came in.
Connie, can I ask you would it be easier for you if there was one highway reserve and not multiple highway reserves? Or does it make it easier for you that there's multiple highway reserves?
Each of our reserves has a very specific purpose with different lengths of times. Bridge and culvert, we were at what, 21.6 last week. I really played with our capital plan a lot. If you guys go for the things that we're suggesting, we'll be below 10% of an increase. But that was through tinkering with these budgets and finding, do we do the same amount for 5 years, or do we maybe go up $10,000 every year for 30 years?
Right, but my question is, my question to you, Connie, are the reserves too specific, or is it state legislation that mandates what the reserves can be? Or can you broaden it so it makes it easier for you and the select board is all I'm asking, not to remove the reserves, but to make it easier for you for cash flow purposes while you're waiting for a $2 million reimbursement.
So these reserves have all been created by a vote of one form or another. It may be by the voters, it may have been by the select board, but they all have very specific purposes. Maybe Pete wants to speak to why he wouldn't want all of his combined into one. One is equipment. They all have life cycles.
I think when you start mixing your reserves, it's very easy. The priorities for having specific reserves, I mean, you have to focus on those purposes.
Yeah.
When it's all mixed together, it's very easy to lose track of what the
Mhm.
purpose is.
You know, with the town center, sorry, the not quite ARPA reserve fund that we
Special
just
projects.
created. Yeah, we don't want to get it taken away. We talked about putting language in there that, obviously, the improvements and all that stuff would not be, we could not use that money for floods, but we put language in there to allow us to use that for disaster recovery, short term, to cover cash flow. So that's something we could put in reserve funds, and how we did that would depend on how those reserves were created originally would dictate whether we'd have to go back to the voters or the select board would do it. Is that how that works?
So what we would do is we would utilize the cash associated with that reserve. And that cash would then have to be made available when FEMA pays us.
Yeah.
Because that reserve has specific purposes as well, things that are slated to be done. Those things would have to be postponed until we got enough cash from FEMA to
Put back in.
replenish our bank account, if you will.
Connie, what are the regulations or laws regarding how fast we have to pay back the piggy bank?
I wasn't getting
We're
a
repl-
sense of that.
So we could raid the piggy bank, as it were, raiding reserve fund, and say, well, we plan to replenish it, but we never actually get around to doing it.
Yeah, I think that,
Well, until those funds are needed for the original.
Well, I know, but
purpose.
there's the
Yeah.
point is,
Well, we anticipate the funds would come back by this date.
I know, and I'm not alleging anything malfeasance, but a town could say, we're gonna raid that, and then just never replenish it.
Yeah.
Let's say we're going
You'd
to.
have
Yeah,
to,
I think
yeah.
you would need, I think the best way would be for the current select board to pass a resolution that says we're gonna take this much out with the intent of paying it back when we get FEMA, so that way if it takes a year, the next select board or the public could hold that resolution up and say, you just got paid back, let's replenish the reserves you said you were going to.
Yes, that's kind of the way I'm thinking. I don't like the idea of just an open-ended, we pinky swear.
Right.
No, you want to put it in writing.
And so if we put it in writing, this specific amount came from here and you list it out, and then upon reimbursement,
Goes back here.
X dollars goes back to X, Y dollars goes
Yeah.
back to Y, and it's sort of, it is an accounting feature
It is.
to
Mhm.
control
in
and
the
return
same
it from whence it
account,
came,
but accounting.
including unassigned funds.
Yes.
So that was sort of the combination of Kara's point and June's point, I think, would be this. You put it back from whence it came.
But unassigned funds is a bit different because we don't really
Fair enough.
replenish unassigned funds, whereas the other ones have specific balances that we track.
Well, so where I was going though is if they pay us back and then we pay back our reserve funds and there's money left over,
There you go.
it
The
sits in
leftovers.
unassigned, right?
Correct. That's a better way to put it. Yes. Thank
Yes.
you.
Okay,
Pete's got his hand up.
go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on these reserve accounts. Highway relating, the only reserve account I could see that would be beneficial, especially in a situation that we're in right now, would be that bridge and culvert fund. Because those funds are earmarked for projects that are multiple years down the road. So like some of these large diameter structures that we replaced this year and the one that we're getting ready to replace on Hillview Road, that would be nice to be able to use some of that money to offset some of those bigger expenses. But all the other reserve accounts are earmarked for equipment and they have time cycles attached to them, guardrails and stuff like that. Those things, if you combine them all into one number, we're going to lose track of, a whole repair policy as far as keeping things in a timely manner. But that bridge and culvert is the only one that I can think of that is earmarked for projects that are, 5 to 20 years down the road from now.
Unless floods destroy more like the Hillview one.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, who knows, 2 years in a row, anything can happen now, so.
Thanks, Pete.
And that reserve he's talking about is actually one that I knocked right off the budget because it's $1 million, but it's way out to fiscal year 31. So hopefully we'll get FEMA money back then and we can make up what we don't put in this year.
Are we ready to look at the draft budget for fiscal year 26?
I don't see why not.
So maybe would it be helpful if I walked through some of these?
Yeah.
All right. So, as we were looking at the first question, Connie started to go through the budget to say, well, if we don't have any money to put towards the budget, what could we do to reduce the request for the FY26 budget, and how could we lower this as much as we could? So she started to look at reserve funds, some of the staffing requests that we had as well. So I'll share my screen and kind of walk through. Included in the packet, this budget is included in the packet. The red lines are the lines where we've made some changes. So the first one here is an admin. The initial request was to add a deputy town manager and have still the assistant to the town manager. This looks at adding a deputy town manager and then essentially keeping the 25-hour a week temporary assistant that we have right now. So it would basically give us about 10 more hours of admin time than we have currently right now. But it wouldn't give us as much as we initially asked for. That would save us about $62,000. And when I say save, it's savings off of the budget as presented in October, not like a savings right now. Next, we've got planning and zoning, and this is a natural change. One of the staff members there decided to go off of health insurance. They have health insurance from another source. So that saved us some real money there that we incorporated into this version. We reduced the transportation planning line from 10,000 to 5,000. We've had a lot of studies that we've done over the past couple of years. I don't think we have anything really in the hopper for this year or next year to really go after for transportation planning. In police, we said, well, if we're going to look at some hard cuts, could we go from 4 officers and a chief to 3 officers and a chief? So that would reduce by about $107,000. But we'd also looked at taking the admin, to which Patty spoke to earlier. We had increased that from 20 hours to a full-time admin in the requested budget. If we reduce that to 20 hours, we would be at $55,000 reduction. Yeah.
So we had talked about sharing that position with Heinsberg. Is that off the table currently?
I don't think it's off the table, but I think they're currently going through some of their own budget challenges right now as well. So I don't want to
I can't
assume.
imagine why.
Yeah, I mean, they've got different
I know, but
different pressures on their budget, but they've also got, I think they had some increased wages in highway and in fire. So they're feeling some pressure that I don't know where their budget's going to land for police either.
municipal sales of Malox are way up this past year.
Well, yeah, I mean, and
Yeah,
just
that's
as a side
interesting.
note, I got contacted by VT Digger this morning. They were doing a story because Brattleboro was looking at like a 20% proposed tax increase. And then the reporters, that was, sort of similar to us. That was their first pass. And he started to see other towns are doing the same thing. So he called us to say, hey, how are you guys doing?
Well,
And he says, well, I'm kind of hearing this around the state. So I don't think it's just us. Everyone maybe is for different reasons. But we, I guess in the misery loves company boat. Moving,
Can I?
yeah,
I
go
just
ahead,
wanna
sure,
say,
yeah.
Just to be clear on those 2
oh yeah,
red reduction lines in police, I'm not suggesting that we don't shoot for what, the 4 officers. I'm just saying, we don't
still
put it
trying
in
to
the
get to
budget.
4. We're just budgeting for 3.
Right, and then if we have the opportunity to have a 4th officer, then we look at our cash flow, we look at our unassigned funds at that point, and
Or we just try to find more officers who will work for dog food.
well,
Round 1.
oh boy, good. Sorry, I didn't catch that right away.
Gonna have to lower our standards or what?
So then the next one we looked
No,
at,
have you met Duke? Sorry, go. It's the lower standards, a lot of them, like, I beg to differ.
Duke is my son's favorite officer.
course, it's
Every time he sees Officer Cohen, he goes, "Oh, where's Duke?" So the next item in police is we on our car replacement cycle, we're due for a new police car. But we could delay that, especially if we're going to reduce by an officer. We could delay that and reduce the amount by $80,000 we'd have to commit to that fund. In library, we looked at the library reserve. There's nothing like imminent in the reserve right now that is due for, so we could probably not fund that for a year. And back to the point we were talking about earlier, maybe next year's budget, we add more to it as we get a little more money back in from FEMA and have some specificity on exactly what we want to spend that money on.
For what they have in the capital plan right now, there'll still be plenty.
Yeah.
They didn't have anything beyond fiscal year 26 even in their capital plan, because now most of it's getting paid through the town center fund.
Okay.
So then in fire, there's an equipment purchase line that, in talking with the chief, it's mostly for replacement of things as they wear out and they try to replace with battery powered, gets more expensive. But they don't have a list of a certain number of items that they have to buy in 26. So we thought we could reduce that there again. If we ended up needing to replace more going over, we likely could, but it's a way to sort of start the budget. In the safety reserve, safety and equipment gear reserve, the chief keeps getting some good deals on air packs, so we've actually got a little bit ahead of the game there. So if we reduce by $5,000, I think it still keeps us on good track to keep the bunker gear that we need as well as air packs. And then the fire capital reserve, total reduction of 35,000. Part of that is $20,000 from the sale of the brush truck, or not the brush truck, is it the brush truck? The truck that went over the water. If we put that into the reserve this year, it can kind of reduce what we need in taxes, and then an additional 15,000. And then this is where Connie looked a few years out and said, okay, if we add 10,000 over the next 27, 28 and beyond, we can pay that back in future years, and we might have more unassigned funds to do so. And then I think the only other ones here that we looked at was in highway. And this was again, all the similar ideas with looking at things that we have expenses in the reserves, but not for a little while out. And we can increase in future years the contribution. So that's a restructure of the highway capital plan, and also a restructure of the bridge and culvert with no projects planned there for a few years out. So all of that, all those changes get us to, oh, I guess I can just look right here. Get to, this is the, oops, sorry, I'm trying to make this better. This 9.69% increase, still not amazing, but considering we started at a little over 21%, it cuts it down by like 11%.
Single digit.
So it was an attempt at sort of a first pass to see, any reaction from the board or the public. And again, we've got another couple, well, I guess technically a week before the next budget meeting, a working week, really, considering this week's going to be a little out the window. But, we could go back, look at all the reserves. We could be more aggressive maybe and say if we took away more from reserves and then with the idea in FY27 really filled them back in, that might put you in a little bit negative as you look out. But maybe that's something we look at.
Well, so based on our conversation earlier, this was where we were kind of heading. Where can we reduce our reserve investments, track them, put them off in a spreadsheet to say, here's how much we took from each one, and then look to cover that offset in the future years when we get FEMA back. It's back to me, this is the opportunity, or the point of doing this is to flatten this 9.69 to much closer to our target ideally. And the only thing I can come up with is reducing positions, and I've seen state government do that. And it's pretty draconian when you we're gonna reduce your staff by 10 or 15% as of next month.
Right, and that work won't get
And
done.
so then, when times are good, you have to then go out and try to rehire and retrain people, or you stop doing things. And I don't think it's that urgent that's what we're doing. I think this is really about the money, not about the services. So it seems to me we ought to keep going back to the reserves and say, can we dig deeper into our reserve investments in the proposed budget, track it, get closer to below 10. And then be holding that off on the side if and when, or when we get the FEMA payment, and then pay ourselves back in those various
Yeah,
reserves.
almost no matter what happens, we've got a plan for it and it's
Yeah,
tolerable.
well, we've got a plan for it other than 2 or 3 more catastrophic floods.
Exactly, yes.
There's that.
I mean, there's a
I
plan for that
thought-
too, but it isn't very good.
Yeah, and if we do, I mean, if we do get another flood, which we all know could be around the corner, we at least now know that there's some funding opportunities that if we get into a real bind, we can go to fairly quickly. So it's not that we don't want to plan for it, but I think we have some options.
Right.
I dug about as deep as I
That's the question,
could
yeah.
with the reserves. What was nice was this year, all that highway had that they were using out of their capital reserve was a $45,000 tractor, but next year they have a dump truck, they have a pickup truck, they have another big item, and they're all things that have to be ordered ahead of time.
Right.
On the upside for cash flow purposes, Pete said, I think he's still here, that the dump truck probably won't come till later in the year, where normally we get them in July. So that helps. But I can't reduce the reserve anywhere there, or there won't be enough to pay for those 2 items next year. Same thing with the fire department. We can't tinker with theirs anymore because we are already contracted with paying for the fire truck in fiscal year 27. Yeah, so we can't tinker much with that because that's a contracted item, and those 2 categories are our biggest purchases without loans.
So one thought after Pete's comments got me thinking that maybe we could look back at is, are there current expenses that we could use the bridge and culvert money for in this fiscal year based on the flooding? Knowing that, yeah, that would set us negative if you look at the capital plan. But if we use that now, and then we could kind of put that towards the budget in FY26, because we would kind of free that money up essentially, right? Because we're not counting on that reserve right now.
Right.
And then we would know that, yeah, we'll be a little behind, but then we would, maybe sort of a resolution idea from the board. If we use $200,000 now, the first 200,000 that comes back from FEMA goes right back into that fund.
Well, and that goes back to, we're really not borrowing from the reserve, we're utilizing the
Utilizing it.
cash that belongs, and yes, that's
And
already
that's
figured
what-
in
I
here.
wonder if we could do even more on that, and even if we go negative for a year.
I
or
took the
two.
whole amount off.
No, I meant like utilize funds that are currently in that reserve for current expenses
I don't
and dip into it and then replenish it.
use the cash,
That's
but
what
we can't use the reserve. And as far as the reserve goes, we're not, I completely took that off the budget, so we're not contributing anything to the bridge and culvert right now.
I think there still might be something that we could look into for current expenses that might then help us with FY26 too.
Josh, the FEMA payments, do they come with any restrictions?
Um,
I don't think they do.
I mean, they're reimbursement for expenses that you have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we say this costs this much, and they say, okay, here you go, this much.
So it's up to us to really direct it.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we can talk, but I think that maybe there's a way to do a little bit more out of that reserve and know.
There's over,
Know that we'll go a little negative in future years as our projection, but know that we can pay that back with money from FEMA fairly quickly.
I mean, I'm looking at that right now. So as I look at so I'm saying, let's not contribute to that at all in fiscal year 26, and we still have over $470,000 in that's cash that we can say we're using this for our flood that we had this year.
Bart?
For context, I'm looking through the entire budget document and picking out the reserve fund items. Should we look at the reserve funds together in a reserve fund list? So like versus taking one off, cut 1 or 2 a page, look at them all together on screen? Is that possible?
How do you mean, just like to
Here are all our reserve funds.
like the current balances?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You can dig out my capital
I'll get the
plan.
cash flow or the cash flow.
I think it would help people to say, well, what are the reserve
Yeah,
funds?
yeah. I got you. Let me see if I can
Makes
find
sense
that
for
right
folks.
now.
It's in the capital
Well,
plan,
yeah,
there's a
including
summary page.
130.
Uh,
It shows how much we're
I
contributing.
don't know if I
Your
have. that
personal
most recent
opinion.
one.
I actually donated
Do I?
just to see
Yes,
what Connie's
I sent
reaction.
it to you that you said you weren't gonna use it.
Sharon, go
I
ahead.
said, keep it in your back pocket.
Let me see if I can find that.
Okay.
Sharon,
David,
go ahead.
thank you. I wasn't sure if I heard you correctly. I have a couple questions. One is, since the budget is being presented now as a reduction from the 21%, will you be and I might have not heard Josh say this, but will you be resetting the budget so we will actually see last year's budget or the actuals to this year's proposed budget, so we can see if things are going up versus things going down from a over budget of 21%? Do you see what I'm saying, Josh? Do you understand what I'm asking? Because you've shown it,
Line by line.
yeah,
So-
like you did, but stop showing a reduction of something when it's actually, you're just reducing what you had proposed at the 21% level.
Oh, yeah, you mean like take the red numbers in red and actually put them into the budget? Yeah, we can do that. We just did them in red just to sort of show the board and the public where those reductions would come from. But yeah, we can certainly do a pass of the budget that would have it with real numbers and get us to 9.69.
Okay,
And
that was
so-
one question. So it's a refresh. That's a refresh. My other question was, what is now driving? Because is that refresh going to show us what the true drivers now are of the 10% increase or the 9.69?
So again, the true drivers, I think, are a couple things, the request for additional staffing in a few departments. And the $433,000 is an 11% or thereabouts, 11% increase on the tax rate. So that alone is a huge driver.
So, this is very difficult, but it seems like those are the things you look for. First, reserve funds. And this is a difficult conversation if we choose to go there. It's not cutting existing positions, but failing to fund new positions. Is that on the table? And frankly, I've lived through several scenarios over a number of decades where it was not just new positions, it was current positions, like two of you 5 people won't be here a month from now.
Have a good Christmas.
Yeah, I think, Tony, I found that document. You might have to help me navigate to the correct tab, but I'll share it. If,
Okay.
oh, wait. I'm not sharing yet. I was sharing for a
Just want
minute.
to go to the summary.
Yep, well, that's where I want to find that. Is that over to
did-
the right?
David, I
Yes,
did have
go ahead.
one more question, and that was my final question, was on the library reserve. Can I just ask, there's a library reserve and a town center reserve, but the library can take from the town center reserve. Can the town center take from the library reserve, or what's the purpose of the separate library reserve?
That goes back-
Sure.
Thank you. And I'm
Sure.
not questioning negatively. I just want to understand as a town center library committee member to know that there's 2 different accounts.
So Kara, this is Lori Dana. I'm the chair of the library, the trustees.
Hi,
So
Lori.
the library reserve is a fund that funds the fit up of the library and repair of the interior of the library. And for example, we just put in new flooring and that came out of the library reserve. We put in, we have on our schedule, I think, to refinish the floors in the community room in the next 3 years. Connie probably knows this better than I do, but we need to paint the community room. We need to clean the carpets. We're having a little issue with the elevator, which is we have a $10,000 bill for the elevator repair right now, and they had to manufacture the part because they don't make parts for this elevator anymore.
It's that old?
David, that's never happened. to me.
23 years old.
So Lori, can I make sure I understand what you're saying? It's basically the library reserve is for the interior, and that's what the trustees determine how it's spent. And the town center reserve fund is for the exterior of the library and everything with the town center.
Yes.
Correct. I regard the library reserve as what a tenant would be paying for if they were in the building.
Yeah, but
Um,
technically, it's all the taxpayers' money funding it. So the fact that it's in
Correct,
two reserves
correct.
is kind of irrelevant to the taxpayer. They're still funding for both interior and exterior,
Correct.
which is fine. It's just I needed to wrap my mind around the fact that that's what it is. So thank you. I appreciate that
Okay.
clarification. You don't need to go into more detail. I just needed to wrap my mind
Okay.
around what was the difference between the two. Thank you.
And just for
So after
everybody's
these-
understanding, we have an MOU with the library that outlines which is the responsibility of which fund and the library budget versus the town budget. Because this question did come up quite a bit over the years, so I think 3 years ago we put that together.
I was going to point out, David, that is relatively recent. It was sort of a little
Yeah.
fuzzy, so I think that MOU was
Yeah.
helpful with clarity.
Thank
So,
you.
Just-
Connie, is this where I need to be? General
Yeah.
summary?
I had no idea that elevator came from Sweden.
So the top portion is contributions and the bottom
Okay.
portion.
It's totals. Okay, so this would be our FY 25 projected balance.
Yep.
So there's. a
Very
bridge
well
and
built.
culvert.
It just doesn't work.
And this is a work in progress, so there could be oopsies.
They're compatible.
Okay, so so this is our capital plan. It's, I think these 24 balances are probably, did you double check those at the audit? Again, this is sort of like Connie gave this to me. I decided not to put it in the packet because I knew it wasn't like finally fully proofread. But for sake of looking at this to
Yeah.
make sure where we're at right now, I think these numbers are pretty accurate for the reserve funds. So the one I have highlighted are where they were at the end of FY 24. And then everyone after that is our projection based on future funding and future expenses.
These are all balances, not contributions. Okay.
Right, yeah, so this would be FY 24 balance at the end of FY 24 and then projected balance at the end of FY 25.
In FY 29 and FY 30, we've got some major capital purchases for the highway.
That's when I think we've got some of those major bridge and culverts coming up. And that's why we're,
That's where we're going to negative 2,000, well, to 2,000 negative in FY 30.
it looks like on the, yeah, maybe we didn't usually you would try to, actually, I think we did talk about that one and we said, because it was out in FY 30, we'd figure it out between now and then. And it was only $2,000. But ideally, we like to keep those all positive numbers, but these are extraordinary times, so we're trying to figure some things out.
Is that true that the equipment is at zero? Is that dump trucks and stuff?
Yep.
Row 30, line 51.
So we've emptied it completely?
Yep.
Sorry, too many voices. Where's that, Jeff?
So we're contributing it to it in fiscal year 25. And that gives Pete what he needs for fiscal year 26.
Sounds like it'll be working.
But we're keeping these as low as we possibly can without going to negative numbers and having, maintaining the schedule without doing the
Right.
up and down.
Right, if we have 4 officers, we need 4 cruisers.
Right, and we currently have 4 cruisers.
But that's 4 officers plus the chief, so we.
Yeah, if the chief gets a cruiser, we need an extra cruiser for.
But if we just do lights. Right now, we're statutorily keeping ourselves at 4 officers, but we're only funding.
Yeah. Handheld siren.
Not even if, like.
We would,
rotated.
if we did.
If we continue the policy of
Bill Gumbel machine.
you take the cruiser home, and we don't know what's gonna come of union negotiations when those resume.
Throw it to finish.
Yeah.
Yeah, so right now we are under the contract which declares each officer gets a cruiser to take home. In the event that we became fully funded and had a chief, right now the chief would not have a cruiser, which could be a problem.
Right,
It's
so
a
either
problem.
we do or we don't have a cruiser problem.
Right.
Depending on whether we have a fully staffed department.
Mhm.
And I think budgetarily, it makes sense to not go to 4 officers for the time being, so that we, A, don't have to pay their salaries and healthcare, and B, we don't have to pay for another cruiser.
Mhm.
So.
It's a lot of money. You just said, yeah.
Yeah, so if we
Savings.
put those two together, just Connie, so people have a dollar figure, if you put together the cost of an officer and a cruiser
What's the healthcare?
Plus the healthcare.
plus healthcare,
Right, that's
That
a
would
big
go
one.
with the
Yeah,
officer.
I mean, that's where.
Well, yeah, some people forget to, they look at the salary and they stop there, but you're right, it is part of the total
So
compensation.
looking at, I mean, we've basically broken that out in first place.
2 different lines.
So
So
budgeting
it
a
was-
hypothetical hire, we budget the health insurance.
You're right, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so the 107 here, I think that was the cost of the officer plus the health insurance, right? the 107.
Cost
can't-
of the officer,
Bringing the
bringing the admin person back to 20.
Well, no, the admin was on a separate line.
Right,
So 107 is basically the full total compensation of the officer, and then a cruiser is about $80,000. So we're
And-
talking about 190 for the year.
Although the cruiser lasts more than a year, so
Correct.
you
Yeah,
tweak it a
amortize it.
little bit,
Yeah.
but it's still, assume it lasts like 4 years, you'd be talking 130,000 a year for the officer
That's
position,
roughly fair, yeah.
not including the indirect, like the building and
the
equipment
tasers-
and the nickel and dime.
There's a few
Mhm.
other stuff, yeah.
The tasers have to be replaced on a fairly frequent schedule that
Mhm.
year. I was gonna say, maybe instead of buying new ones, we should get more use out of the ones we've got, but
Right.
let's not go there.
It's-
and the 80,000 that was in there was to actually replace one of the 4 that
Right.
Anthony feels if we get up to full staff.
Yeah.
One of those 4 cruisers needs to be replaced.
Well, so David Anthony's not here. It strikes me that this conversation, if we were gonna dip into positions, this is a candidate set of positions, but it's trade-off. If we're gonna really try to reduce expenses, do you reduce police positions, do you reduce other positions, like especially newly planned positions? Those are questions for us to address. I think I've always thought about the police department as what services and coverage, what shift coverage does the town want to pay for?
Mhm.
And we should start with that
Exactly.
conversation because the fewer positions, fewer shifts.
An interesting corollary to that question is when you ask our voters what shift coverage they think they're getting,
Mhm.
they have no idea.
Right.
People say, I don't see why we're paying cruisers to be out at 2 o'clock in the morning, and the answer is,
We're not.
we're not.
Right.
So that's part of it. If we're gonna say that, it's like realistically,
Mhm.
what do we want?
I think that conversation personally, David, is overdue to say, what do we actually have budgeted now?
Yeah.
And what do we actually want for shift coverage? And to have the chief here for that conversation, because
Yeah.
there are difficult choices, like many things. I've thought, what does the town get? We should probably frame it as, what does the town want to pay for?
Yeah.
The citizens, the
Mhm.
voters.
So I think that's definitely a good topic as we look at some of these cuts for next meeting.
Yeah.
To really dive into what do we get, what don't we get, where we cover, what don't we cover.
And my point is, I think some of these are plausible and some are less plausible. Like, I don't think we can cut back on fire trucks.
No.
Just saying. Like, I don't think that's plausible.
Yeah.
And highway, I mean, you gotta plow the roads. There are some things that are much more difficult.
Mhm.
And some things that frankly become at least potential candidates. Like, could you live without them? You could if you wanted to. It's how much you want to pay.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Makes a lot of sense.
Also, the wild card is the insurance. I mean, when I'm budgeting for these vacant positions, I'm budgeting for a 2-person plan. It could come in as an over $30,000 family plan.
Or
It could
Or
come
they
in
can
at a
opt out.
$5,000 opt-out.
Yeah.
Highway actually, out of their whole staff, only 2 are doing health insurance. They're all opting out
Taking the
Well,
money.
just
This budget.
Yeah.
of this budget,
of
yes.
this budget. So a parenthetical point, this is a huge driver of staff costs, right?
It is.
Health insurance. And if people ask why are school taxes going up, a big driver of school taxes is health insurance, because that is a personnel heavy system.
I mean, I just did the thing a minute ago. Even with everyone taking an opt-out and all that, we're still spending 225, or was it $121,000 more on health insurance this year? And we're insuring less people.
It's not, it's sustainable.
It's not, no,
Yeah.
and it's not,
Yeah,
if people had
their business model.
changed their, we would be spending triple that more, we'd
Mhm.
be
Mhm.
closing in $500,000 extra. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Kara, go
what
ahead.
we can do about that.
Bart, you keep mentioning the additional new staff, and I know you guys might have gone through it, but do you know exactly how many positions you're talking about?
Yeah, so in admin, we'd put in for a deputy town manager and an assistant to the town manager, especially looking at the amount of admin work that's been increasing lately related to the flood and other admin work in general. In library, I think they have an additional 10 or 12 hour a week, 12 hour a week staff person. And then what am I forgetting, Connie? There was one other. Admin and police, we had looked at bringing that up to 40 hours per week.
I'm
And
sorry,
then
what,
we,
what'd you say, Josh? What was that?
a police administrative position.
okay, sorry, yeah.
It had been at 20 hours. I think the
Extra
person
salary.
doing it before, I think she was routinely around 15 hours or so. But that
we have
is
somebody
another
doing that
department
now?
that could use, that is another department that could use a lot more admin.
They sure could.
But is that, do we have somebody, I'm trying to understand who we have doing what now. We don't
Right
have a
now,
police admin, she retired, right?
she retired and we'd sort of been going back and forth a little bit with Heinsberg on, do we split somebody? What do we do there? And now I think we're both into the budget mode where we need to figure out what are we really gonna have for budget, and then we can try to get
But
somebody.
we
in there, 'cause
We
Anthony
don't
needs it.
currently have somebody there, but we budgeted somebody to be there in previous years for part-time, right?
Correct, and until
Okay.
this spring, we had somebody there for the last 20 years, however long Diane was here for.
That's not really a new position in the sense of, I'm trying to figure out, that's not really a new position because we had somebody budgeted there for all
Yeah,
the
it would
years
just
gone
be-
by.
It would just be increasing, it was an increase in hours, knowing that the admin work and policing is also increasing quite a bit.
The first draft was 40 hours, not 20.
Correct.
And so the red line here is going from 40 back to
Back to
20,
20.
baseline, if you will.
Well,
Yep.
But there was a baseline of 20 from the year before.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Again, the health insurance.
So for me, that's in my mindset, that's not a new position. It was a position that you had,
No.
you just have it vacant right now and you haven't refilled it. If you keep it
That's
at the 20. But going back
Correct.
to the deputy, what did you say, a deputy what?
A deputy town manager, looking at the work that's, I've been giving Duncan, who's the assistant to the town manager, it's been increasing in volume and complexity.
So is that changing his position or adding a separate, completely separate role?
It was, so the initial pass of the budget was keeping Duncan's position and adding that position, knowing that we continue to have an increase in admin work that's coming in. Some of it's directly related to the flood, but we could certainly fill plenty of time with the number of requests that are coming in to look at various things throughout the town.
And then the other admin position was an assistant to whom for what? And these are both full-time positions?
Well, no, so the proposal was a 40-hour a week deputy town manager and a 30-hour per week assistant to the town manager, which is basically which is Duncan's current position. Then looking at the revised budget, it's keeping the deputy town manager in there and then taking the assistant to the town manager position and knocking that to a 25 per hour per week part-time position, which is what we have for the temporary position right now that Lynn is doing a good job focusing on minutes, EWP program, elevations and buyouts.
So I'm
rather
just trying to
than an
understand.
assistant to the town manager,
It would be an
we're
an
looking
admin
at it,
assistant.
admin assistant.
So you're looking at an admin assistant instead of an assistant to the assistant town manager.
Well, they'd
Is that what
probably
you
both,
just said? What did Connie
they
just
would
say?
both be, they would both be assisting the town manager, but so the one passes with the deputy town manager and an assistant. The second pass is deputy town manager and administrative assistant, part-time.
Both working directly for you.
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, what, I'm just trying to understand, the escalation from an assistant manager to a deputy, is it for salary increase purposes? Is that what that is, or why having now both? I'm just trying to understand a new titled position.
Right, because the work that Duncan has been growing into here over the last year has increased in complexity. We've been giving him, more and more things to do that I think better fit the job description of a deputy town manager than they do with his current, basically assistant to the town manager.
And should he ever seek to extend his career, it's easier. I mean, we should describe his position as what he's
Yeah,
doing.
and he right now is supposed to be working 30 hours per week. That was what we had to deal with him when he first started. And since the flood, he's been going over that every week because we've needed him to, because the volume of work is certainly there. And again, I think even if all the flooding work went away tomorrow, there is still plenty of work that the town would want us to do. Because then we would flip right back to traffic calming or water and wastewater projects or
website
road
or-
projects, website updates
just,
that
yeah.
we could certainly put a lot more time and effort into managing those projects as well.
And the FEMA money is, his hours for FEMA money is part of the reimbursement.
Correct. Yeah, every hour he spends on FEMA, we will get reimbursed partially for.
Thank you
So,
for
yeah, so-
explaining that, and I apologize for missing a previous meeting if you've
No.
explained it before, but thank you.
Happy to explain it because you're not the only one, I'm sure, that is still coming up to speed on the budget. Attendance at these meetings has not been as great as the pie that
It was
Jay has been
store-bought
bringing.
coffee. That was why, if I'd had.
So,
homemade
there
coffee,
are plenty of people that need some
I'd
explanation
have
for
an
sure.
experiment.
June,
What-
go
what
ahead.
To tax the homemade.
I wanted to go back to the health insurance. What is the current percentage that the employees are contributing to their premium?
10%.
So is that something you could consider again? Because I know we did that, we instituted that when I was on the select board, but that is an area that is could help us significantly. And 10% is low for most organizations as far as a contribution.
That's
we-
actually not true.
Right, our peer towns are actually contributing 100% more
Yep.
often than not.
We thought it was fewer, but it turns out there are a lot still doing 100%. And we don't even have 15 people on insurance. And of those
doesn't-
15, several of us do the high deductible plan. Whereas the others range anywhere from a single person to a family plan on the platinum.
Yes, and I know when we looked at this before, it's still a significant cost, and I would be interested in seeing a report out on what the other towns are doing, because this, with health insurance going up 20% across the board, I'm guessing towns are going to be looking at doing things differently.
The main input that I got, June, was that they're afraid of losing staff, so they are not tinkering with health insurance. There was a lot of back and forth on MuniNet last year, and all the towns were asking each other, what are you doing? What are you doing? And they were just losing employees so quickly, and that was kind of a deciding factor with some employees that even left here.
Yeah, and
They
I
left for better
understand.
packages, including health insurance.
I understand I'm speaking to employees and no one wants to see, more money coming out of their pocket. Nobody wants to do that. And our taxpayers don't either. I'm wondering, I'm not asking you to pull this information. I'm guessing that, the organization in Montpelier.
VLCT.
Yeah, VLCT could give us that information. And I would love to see that posted, because I think then there is something to back up what you're asking for.
I have a hard copy book. I don't know if I can access a PDF, but it's hundreds of pages long and very complex because of the different benefits that each town does, which takes us back to the compensation study.
Right, we do have that, and
And they thought 10% was adequate.
when we did the
Well, and that
compensation study 2
compensation
years
study
ago,
was done.
that was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we did just ask them to do a benefits update, which I need to review. They got me a draft. I'll try to see if we can get that for the next meeting, because that would be informative. I think we included benefit contribution.
They being.
Oh, sorry. No, the GovHR, which changed their name to a different company. So the same company that did the benefit survey, and they had sent me a draft I haven't had a chance to review, so I'll try to review that and get a final copy of that for a meeting here in the next week or so.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Josh, good point. When you had that benefit survey, showing our essentially competitive position against other competitors,
Mhm.
other hiring places, where did we stand? We weren't top of the cost heap, I don't think.
Yeah, and
Moving target,
Well, true, yeah.
And I haven't I haven't even read through the draft they sent me yet, but because it was 2 years ago when we did the full compensation survey,
Mhm.
I think we were at 10% at that point, and that was pretty competitive with the comparable towns at that point, is to Connie's point.
Yeah, we don't want to be the bottom, and I don't think we can afford to be the top, so.
No.
Bart?
So one of the challenges we have is like, what are the comparables? You know, we're a modestly sized town. We are not a poor town compared to most of the towns in Vermont. We are actually relatively high income compared to most of the other towns of our size. But at the same time, we are on the edge of Chittenden County, which, so there are some sort of downs and ups. And that speaks not just to health insurance, but compensation. So typically, you know, sort of scope of responsibility matters. If you're managing a budget of 150 million, you tend to earn more than if you're managing a budget of 5 million. That's true in the corporate world, the nonprofit world, and the municipal world. And that's where it starts to get more challenging because it's total compensation. And to the point somebody made here earlier, it's an equation between health insurance, retirement, you know, days off, other kinds of things, training stipends. It can go on and on to try to come up with equity or comparability.
I just looked right now, we only have 11 people on health insurance for the town.
So the ability to save considerable dollars by playing around there is not as great as we thought.
That may be true, but I think that's the numbers that we would like to see because 11 people doesn't really tell us, you know, what that's costing. Because if you have 11 people who are putting their families on the plan, that's a significant expense.
Yeah, I think we can look at that and say like, what is 1 percentage point bias across those 11 people? I think we did that last year.
We did.
And we can come back with every 1 percentage point is this amount of dollars.
Right, we did
And
that last
add
year.
that to the conversation in real dollars, because you're right, 11 people doesn't tell us if that's $11,000 or $11 per percentage point.
I
Right.
think it's a question to ask. I don't mean to imply that we shouldn't be looking at it.
We only have 2 people on family plans. The rest are 2-person plans or single.
But I think we can look at it, put a dollar figure to it, and
Oh, I already have that on the benefits page, the
Okay.
salary benefits.
well, then
page
we
that I
can,
do.
we can certainly add that. But if we look at like, if employees contribute 11%, what would that save us
Oh, yeah.
overall? And then we can come back with a number so that we can actually like apply to a real world budget, which was helpful last year. I know we did that sort of on the fly last year, so I'm not suggesting we do it now, but
So part of those 11 would be, I'm doing a 2-person plan in this budget for a new town clerk. So that's a guess. We're doing 3 police officers that are guesses as to what type of, so out of the 11, I'm budgeting for 11 employees being on health insurance, but 4 of them don't exist. They're vacant positions.
No idea if it's gonna be an opt-out or a family plan.
It could be a $5,000, it could be an over 30,000. So, I mean, and those numbers are, when you look at the department for like police and you're looking at 3 officers, well, that's
It'd be
almost a $90,000 variable that could end up being a 15,000.
but for budget purposes, if we just keep all assumptions
Yeah.
consistent,
Yeah.
we can come back with a budget number. I mean, the reality of it might be vastly different, but that is a risk we take no matter how we do the budget.
So anything else for tonight on the review of the draft fiscal year 26 budget? We have a couple of things to play with for the next meeting, Bard.
You know, we started at what, 3.5% as our target, something like that.
Did we pick a target?
At the first meeting, there was a discussion.
Yeah, I mean,
Everything was on the table.
Oh,
We
just-
want all these services and we
That was
only
the
want to
wish
spend
list.
no more than 3.5%.
so, right, it's a target. And then, you know, if we
Then we
hit
roll up
around
our
20, it would seem to me that what we might be shooting for is somewhere between 3.5 and 10,
3.5 and 9.
or 3.5 and 9.
I want to keep it single digit.
Yeah.
I want to keep it 3.5, but I know.
I don't even know where.
Mm.
I kind of went through everything with a fine tooth comb. I really don't know where to go from here.
Well, here's what I see as the risk, though. If the voters vote down the budget, you're gonna have to get a finer tooth comb, right?
Mhm.
Or reduce services.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the
That's-
combing, I think.
Yeah.
We should, yeah.
But I mean, we have to
reduce our budget
recognize-
to the point where you don't have to reduce services.
Right.
The voters want that. They say so, and I hope not. but-
We have to recognize too, that part of this is because we have been artificially
Right.
deflating the budget for over 3 years now.
The actual
So
budget
if we
amount,
had
yeah.
400,000 to throw at it,
Yeah.
where would we be? And that's what we've been,
Mhm.
our budget has grown. We've just been throwing more
Mhm.
cash at it.
Our
So-
budget's actually down as it is now. It's the budgeted amount is down over last year. It's just we can't buy it down right now. So,
With the,
Yeah, yeah.
with the reduced budget that we looked at. you're
yeah,
talking-
the reduced budget. the-
Yeah.
Yes.
Because if
yeah.
we put that 433 at it again, it would reduce it by about 11%, so we'd be negative
Mhm.
for the tax rate increase. It would go down. So yeah, I think your numbers tie up.
Yes.
Pete, go ahead.
Actually, I think Kara was up before me.
Kara, go ahead.
I just was gonna reiterate what Bart just mentioned is that this is now a year that it's not gonna get voted on in town meeting. And I think you should be cautious of that. I think if you put a 9% increase in front of your taxpayers, I really think the budget will get voted down. I think the economy is not the greatest for everybody right now. And I just want to put it out there. I wouldn't want you guys to, have to go through the sharpening of the pencil thing. So I'm just giving you a heads up. I don't think a 9% tax increase is going to fly with the taxpayers right now. So maybe you can bring in officers on a stepped phase situation where the first half of the year you're projecting 2, and the second half of the year you're projecting bringing on a third, but you have only hired 1 new officer in the past however many years, that might be an opportunity for you there to phase it in a little bit. I mean, you'd take officers if you could have them tomorrow. I get that, and I'm not knocking that. But realistically, history has shown you that you haven't gotten them. You didn't get them this year. You had however many budgeted in FY24. You lost 1, you brought 1 on, so you've got 1. So I'm just recommending, I really hope you can get it down to an amount that will get passed the first time through.
Thank you, Kara. Pete?
Yeah, so a couple different things. One is staffing. I know we're trying to slice and dice and, find, I'm gonna call it pennies, but we all know what happened in highway. I lost 3 employees all within 30 days, strictly due to benefits and salary. That's it. It's what's going on out there. All these specialized trades, police, highway, even administration, towns that can't staff these departments are throwing tons of money and better benefits to get these people. And so, every year we always talk about, well, let's make them pay more health insurance. Well, let's cut their increases in salaries. Well, you're going to lose staff. And to rehire that staff, you're going to have to step everything up at a higher rate. Take, for instance, the town that I lost the 3 individuals to, they allow domestic partners on their health care. And as far as I know, we do not. They give bonuses twice a year. They give 100% health insurance. So, there's towns do different things. It's not cookie cutter for everybody. So I just wanted to say that part about employees and how important it is to really think about the staff you have and the important, how important it is to keep your solid staff in place. The second part is back to the funding, the overall funding. That bridge and culvert reserve, I do think there's at least 3 locations, big locations, Snipe Island Road, Hillview Road, Beesaw Road, that using that money from that reserve would be warranted. These are large diameter structures that got blown out, which is, exactly what that reserve was earmarked for. Had we not got a FEMA claim, a disaster claim, we'd be tapping those accounts to put those structures back in. So, we're probably talking $250,000 between those 4 little locations. So, maybe that can be some of this offset and get this tax rate down. So I'm just putting that out there.
Thanks, Pete.
Already did that, though. The only thing in Bridge and Culver is Southview out in fiscal year 31. We're not,
Yeah, but I
funding
think
anything else.
you looked at not putting any money in 26. I think what Pete's saying and where I was trying to go earlier was let's use money out of it right now to offset what we're
Correct.
going to use unassigned funds
Yeah.
in FY25. knowing that when we get paid back, that money will go back into that reserve.
Yeah.
And that would then essentially free up some money in FY 25 to use towards 26.
Right.
What's if you pull that up again, what's the balance in bridge and culvert currently?
Over, I think it'll be over 400,000.
418,000.
Yeah.
No, I guess. It's, yeah, 418 at the end of FY 24. And we'll be at 473 because we have a budgeted contribution in 25.
I would recommend we take Pete up on his suggestion.
Yeah, it's a
because
good
that's
idea.
a significant sum of money,
Yep.
and I think he makes a good case for eligible expenses.
Yep.
I agree.
I think we
It's,
can,
it's just not adding up for me, though. We
Okay.
can't use what that reserve is intended for something other than what it was intended for. We can only use the cash.
that's what he's saying. If we have a $200,000 culvert that we just paid for on Beesaw Road, I'm pulling that number out of thin air. I don't know exactly how much
Yeah.
it costs. We
We're
take,
utilizing the
we
cash.
take the money out of that, utilize 200,000 on that, and then that would, in
That carries
theory,
through until
free
you
up
get
200,000 more dollars that we could put towards
And then it goes.
26
into that.
budget, because we're not spending that out of unassigned funds right now.
Right, but that reserve lives in the general. So if I look at the general checking account today, oh, I have $3 million. And then I total up all these reserves.
There's too much.
Oh, 2.5 million of it really belongs to reserves. Well, we know we're gonna go beyond what the reserve total is.
Mhm.
We don't do anything, we just keep using that
Mhm.
cash.
So
I don't think we have to make any motions or anything to use it. We're just using the cash, and because the only expense assigned to that fund isn't happening until fiscal year 31, it changes nothing. We're just using the
Right.
cash that's,
I think let's look at it
Sitting
again.
there.
I think we might be able to, let's look and see when we have time to like look at the numbers, but I think we might be able to find some money there, but let's look and see.
Kara, go ahead.
I think Connie's confusing cash flow versus reserve use, and what you're talking is budget, Josh, and she's talking cash flow. So
And
that's,
I
you're
will
talking
say to
to
her point, like, I know where she's coming from on the
Right.
cash flow, because like,
Oh.
I can envision it in
Correct.
my head where she's coming from. But that's why I want to like, not do it in real time in the meeting. Let's look at it
Yep.
tomorrow in the office and
Yep.
see how does the cash flow match up with if we
You're
shuffle
you're
money
talking budget.
around, what could we do? And then we
You're
can come
talking-
back in
You're
2
talking
weeks.
pulling these funds into the budget to use. I get what you're saying.
Right.
But my question was to Pete, because Pete was just talking about the loss of highway department. Pete, were you able to fill those positions? Do we have a full department, or are we still looking for positions? I'm sorry, I'm not up to date on this.
Yes, we are fully staffed.
And so how long did it take you to get fully staffed?
About 30 to 45 days. Two of the individuals, one of them did not have a CDL. Two of the three individuals have zero highway experience. How's that?
You're fully staffed though, right?
But I am fully staffed, but I mean.
I want to just say congratulations on that. Great
okay.
job.
Well,
I-
thanks. I was pretty worried about it, but I mean-
I appreciate you getting fully staffed, and I appreciate you training people who haven't done it before but are willing to give you their effort. So I just want to say kudos on that. I'm not trying to call out anything or be any way like that. I'm saying thank you for staffing your department and getting it up and running before the snow flies. Thank you.
well, thank you, Kara. Appreciate it. Yeah, it was definitely a challenge. And, there's a lot of training that's going to happen. We got one person that's going to have to get a CDL, and that's about an $8,000 expense now, because it's all done through DOT. But back to my point, it was money and benefits that took those people away. And we,
Well, Pete,
It's-
one of them was a promotion, right?
Okay, we
No,
really need
no,
to pick
it
on
was-
budget here.
Yeah.
One was a promotion, so.
yeah, okay, yeah, exactly. But the other two weren't. So, back to the reserve accounts. I think in my opinion, if we can use some of that money and it's not earmarked till 2031, I think that could help the budget considerably. But Connie would have to run all those numbers, and but had we not had a claim and we had that day, say we had a microburst like we have had in the past, where it's 5 square miles and it took out 4 structures in Richmond, but no one else, and we didn't meet the threshold for a disaster claim, we'd be
We're
stuck
out.
with that expense. So we would
Yeah.
go right after that account to pay for that because we wouldn't have it in the
Yeah.
budget. So that's my point. That's what I'm saying.
No, it's a good point.
Yeah.
Anything else on the walkthrough of the fiscal year 26 budget? Okay, let's move on to approval of the warrants that we did not approve, but we did sign last week.
Dave, can I just make one comment?
Go ahead.
Okay, I can't stand it. You know, if we look back 20 years ago, our population was 4147. If we look last year, it was 4127. We lost 20 people in 20 years. Meanwhile, what happened to prices?
Way up.
Exactly. They probably doubled in that span or
Oh,
more.
more than doubled.
It's on the same number of backs that it has always been. And it's getting worse, it's getting worse, it's getting worse. Unless we can find a way to lure people into Richmond, we're gonna continue to have this problem to some degree or another, probably. to a large
Unfortunately, they
degree.
outlawed Shanghaiing people.
We have no
Yeah.
place to house
Well,
them.
chain them down, but
Mhm.
you know, I mean, our planning and zoning department, our long-term plan and so forth, I think is good. We probably need to step it up, I don't know, but Richmond's got a lot of attractive landscape, a lot of attractive amenities. I don't know
We
why
just
people
don't have
want
water and
to.
sewer where we need it to be.
Well, we don't have housing.
And
Pardon?
that's because of water and sewer.
Yeah, it's a vicious circle.
Well, and we don't have housing that many people can afford to buy.
So true.
So there are many houses for sale that are $700,000, $800,000, $900,000.
Mhm.
And so the other thing I'd say between 2000 and 2023,
Mhm.
our ranking for per capita income in Vermont towns went from somewhere near the middle to somewhere very close to the top.
Yeah.
And these things are all related, you
Mhm,
know?
mhm, Right.
Um, And so what's really difficult, I think, in many ways, is we have some people ostensibly who find it easier to afford it, tax increases, but there are a whole bunch of other people for whom it is a more direct, immediate burden about choices about what can I afford to pay for?
Mhm.
Whether it's, you know, maintaining their house or buying a car.
Sure, they have to make
Um,
choices.
Sort of,
Yeah.
the sort of below the
Mhm,
average
mhm.
median income, those
Yeah,
folks
right.
are more challenged by our situation.
Right, and they're more likely gonna be hurt by a tax increase and, you know, I mean. they're gonna feel it
Exactly.
more, So, and I feel their pain, you know. We're not doing this to them, but it's happening.
It is being done to them though.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we're doing it to ourselves too, but it's.
Well,
I
us
wish
in
there
the
was,
school.
you know,
Yeah.
So reminder to us and everyone else, about 70% of our tax burden does not come out of this room. It comes out of the
Exactly right,
educational system.
exactly right. If there
And
were no
I'm
other
not-
tax out there, this would be.
I'm not throwing stones at the school system. It's just
Mhm.
like that is the fact. We're only about 30% of the total.
That's right.
Well, people lose that message because they write the check out to the town of Richmond.
Yes.
Mhm.
Exactly, yeah.
It'd be nice to be able to
Collect taxes.
divest those.
Those
We
are the
collect the
calls.
taxes, but we give 70% of it to the
We need
schools.
to up our fee a lot for collecting that tax.
Well, that's why we're here.
Raise taxes?
Yeah.
So it's like even the one year that we had that we did reduce
See how that goes.
the tax rate for
The
Richmond.
education tax.
The education went up even more
Yeah.
than the prior year, so did it impact people's property
course it
taxes?
did.
It didn't, but people don't look at that percentage
Right.
breakdown in the middle of their
So you
tax
Write the check
bill.
out to the town of Richmond.
They make the check out to the town of Richmond and then, well, what was in the last warrant? $2.2 million going to the school.
We did talk about not giving that to them, so.
We did.
It's not a long-term solution, but.
More
They're-
family
they're-
advice.
Instead of just closing the schools.
Well,
The same
Charge a
town that's
commission.
having a hard time passing its budget over,
and usually.
4 times.
Hmm.
Every school board meeting, there are people that say we should close the schools. Or so I understand.
Right.
I mean, as hard as this budget is to look at, we were able to do our repairs this year. There were towns that couldn't.
Yeah.
That is true.
They didn't have it, they couldn't get it.
Mhm.
Banks aren't too thrilled about loaning you money when you don't
No.
have any money.
Banks aren't too thrilled about loaning you money when the cost of the repairs is 4 times your annual
Annual
budget.
budget.
too, I think
Mhm.
was-
So about the warrants we didn't approve.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the warrants that were originally presented at the November 18th, 2024 board meeting.
Thank you, Jade. We have a second.
David Dispart, I will second that.
Thank you, Bard. Motion has been made and seconded. Before we close discussion, I just want to apologize. I should have picked up on that last week and it was a surprise to me as well. Absent any further discussion, calling the motion to a vote, please identify yourself and signify your vote.
Adam, I.
Lisa, I.
Bart, aye.
Jay, aye.
David, I. Motion has carried, so we can approve the warrants that we signed last week.
And since we don't, our next regular meeting is not a budget meeting, we don't really have to sweat items for next agenda. Oh, we can.
Well, we can talk about the items for the next budget meeting.
We can
Yeah.
sweat the budget.
Yeah, we will.
Change, but you can sweat it.
Got
So,
a list of stuff.
yeah, Josh was maintaining a list of some next steps.
Yeah, so budget next steps, I think that we'll research and we'll be back with in 2 weeks.
Should we pretend to sign the warrants?
So a process question. So when do we think we would anticipate closing out final proposed budget? I'm just thinking ahead of our plan, like
I mean,
how many meetings we have.
we've got the one budget meeting on December 9th.
Although now it's.
Then,
We're still meeting, so.
Whatever.
Right here.
then we've got a regular meeting after that.
It's
Lori.
been-
Lori,
Hey, guys, we're still
having a
talking,
meeting. You're
figure-
drowning us out.
So we've got, well, here, maybe I'll pull it up here. So we've got,
December 9th.
yeah, December 9th. And then we've got a regular meeting on the 16th. If we needed it, we could try to meet that Tuesday, the 17th. But after that, we got Christmas week and then New Year's pretty quick. We could still do stuff the first week of January. We could do January 7th, January 13th. So we've got a little bit of time, but it gets tight. I think it has to be finalized by like the 20-something-ish of January.
That week, yeah.
So I have a suggestion, just because I tend to be, a little paranoid about this. I'd rather schedule meetings and cancel them
Yeah.
than go, oh my gosh, we need
Yeah.
another meeting. So perhaps we could schedule one, and if we don't need it,
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to schedule one
sense.
for December 17th, which should be the day after the second meeting in December.
That makes sense.
that would work for me.
Say December 17th.
We'd have 2 meetings back to back. Okay.
Yeah, like we're doing next week anyway, or
Better do January too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
oh,
Fortunately, our handsome pay is prorated by a number of meetings, so every time we meet, we're making more money.
mhm.
This discussion with my 5-year-old the other day. Now when my wife asks him, what is zero? He doesn't say it's a number. He says, it's an idea.
It's an idea.
Meet your
like-
kids in a few years.
It's a concept of a
Like
number.
kind of 2 extra classes on top of your engineering degree, you can get a philosophy of math degree. which is basically that
Yeah.
Infinity and zero are ideas and everything else is numbers. So
Very, very good.
Line doesn't.
he doesn't know what it
exist either.
means, but
That's great. So if we say December 17th as a date, and then we could also like maybe just hold on our calendars, like
Yeah,
we could do a January 6th, January 13, or January 7, January 13 would be like
You should meet my
the
granddaughter.
Tuesday in
very specific.
Pick-
January, right after the Monday.
January 7th?
Yeah.
That gets us 2 back-to-back times, but that accelerates it a little bit.
My brain is completely fried, Josh. Would it be possible for you to send out a list of all these meetings?
I can certainly do that.
I'm with you, Jay.
Vote on it.
And it's not even 9 o'clock yet. Brain frying doesn't usually happen until after
No,
10:30.
it's been a long.
my brain was fried at 8 o'clock this morning.
No, it's been,
Held it.
it's been a long month. Okay.
I'm just so disheartened by all these numbers. I'm sorry.
Mm.
All right.
And it's not anyone's fault, but. it's
Well,
real.
whoever the freak is who's out there doing rain dances,
That's true.
Wow.
We gotta
tell them to
that.
stop.
I don't think there's an ordinance against it, so.
We ready to
Although-
adjourn?
No, Adam, it's funny, out of all the numbers I looked at, I didn't even look at the bottom number. I looked at the percentage, and you're right, we're almost 100,000 in
Yeah,
expenses
100.
below last year.
Mhm.
Which is the
Good
fee.
perspective.
Mr. Chairman, I move we adjourn.
Thank you, Jay. Do we have a second? Thank you, Adam. Motion to adjourn. Please identify yourself and signify your vote.
Adam, I.
Lisa, aye.
Bart, aye.
David, I. We are adjourned, 8:45. Thank you,
Thanks all
everyone.
y'all.